Hi, it's Charlie Angus. The footage that's coming out of Gaza is absolutely horrific. Uh, the mass starvation of children. Reports that doctors are so famished that they pass out as they're trying to help the children. Day after day, reports of mass groups of children and families being murdered as they attempt to get water or attempt to get food aid. Is anyone surprised? I think for the last year, we all thought that someone would step up, that our governments, Canada, France, the European Union, would say to Netanyahu, okay, enough with the bombing of the hospitals, enough with the killing of the journalists, enough with the targeting of the doctors, enough with cutting off aid and targeting children. You need to stop this. We need to get the international rule of law established. We need to get peacekeepers in there, and we need to start rebuilding as we work to get the final hostages released. But nobody did stand up. Nobody took on Netanyahu. What we're going to find out is that Gaza was the place where Western moral leadership went to die. All that talk about the international rule of law, the international rules-based order, the duty to protect, the duty to ensure never again in the face of war crimes and crimes against humanity. All those words now sound so hollow. I want to talk a bit about what's happening on the international front to confront the genocide. I want to talk a bit about the history of this moment, and then also the powerful signs we're seeing at Grassroots of ordinary people who are stepping up when their leaders aren't. I'm going to begin with this quote that I found from David Slack, television writer and producer, who wrote, "Remember sitting in history thinking, if I was alive then, I would have ... You're alive now. Whatever you were doing is what you would have done." And so none of us are going to be able to tell our grandchildren, we didn't know. We didn't know this was happening. So what we do from here really does matter. So let's just go back to October 7th. I know with the Middle East, dates are extremely political. People will say you should start before October 7th, but I'm going to just start there. The world woke up to the horrific news of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, the brutal images of the violence perpetrated against the young people at that music concert. Suddenly the whole world was there saying to Israel, we have your back. At the time, Netanyahu was pretty much on the run. This guy was facing massive corruption charges. There were millions of people in the streets protesting him. This guy was one step ahead of the courts. And October 7th happened. And suddenly Netanyahu was in the driver's seat. If you read the book War by Bob Woodward, it does a really, really good explanation of those early days after October 7th, when there was so much determination to get the hostages back, and particularly across the Middle East, who recognized they needed to deal with this. Hamas had no friends, really. They needed to get the hostages back before this situation destabilized. But one of the main obstructions was Netanyahu and his government, and feeding the extremist base in his government. Biden failed in dealing with Netanyahu. They knew there was a real threat that he was going to use hunger as a weapon against the Palestinians. They knew he was thinking of ethnic cleansing. And so Biden could have dealt with it then, and he didn't. And he opened the door to Trump, and he opened the door to the monsters. And so here we are today with this horrific genocide that's taking place. I was recently in Dublin for the European Security Commission meetings, and I met with the Ukrainian delegation, who took me aside and said that they felt that America had really betrayed Ukraine initially on Gaza, because while the rest of the world was watching the Gaza atrocities being committed by the IDF, the West was saying, let's all get on the side of supporting Ukraine against Putin. And the Ukrainian delegation told me, they said, why was the global South going to stand with Ukraine when the West was obviously not willing to stand with the Palestinian people? That moral failure of the West has been noted, and it will take a long time to recover from. So where are we now? Well, we see right now, despite the failure of leaders, the church recently spoke up very strongly. The Catholic Church, the Greek patriarch in the Middle East, speaking up on behalf of the people of Gaza. Just recently, the IDF fired a tank shell at the one church in Gaza, the Catholic Church, where the Pope Francis had called in every night, hoping and talking to people about keeping safe. The church interpreted this shell attack not as an accident, as Israel stated, but as an attempt of intimidation, because the church had been speaking up more and more on Gaza. So now the church is speaking up boldly. We see the United States has gone after UN Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, trying to intimidate her. I met Miss Albanese in Ottawa. She is a truth teller. But even as the United States and Donald Trump attempts to threaten the international community and the international courts of justice and the UN, it's not working. And this is where the IDF and Israel will pay in the long term. We've already had 2 IDF soldiers arrested in Belgium and held for questioning for potential war crimes. We see reports that Canadians, yes, Canadians who are in the IDF, are now afraid to come home because they're afraid they're going to get investigated for war crimes. Well, I'm sorry, dude. If you committed crimes against humanity, you will be charged. And this is the problem of having taken all those selfies and doing all those poster videos as the IDF went through and blew up homes and targeted Palestinian people. That's all on record, and it's all going to come back to haunt, because even though our leaders are failing right now, the International Criminal Court is continuing to do its work despite the threats from Donald Trump and the rumblings from Netanyahu. So that work is going to continue. In terms of ordinary people's resistance, we're seeing huge actions in Greece and France, stopping supplies going to Israel. Once again, our leaders are going along with selling weapons, but ordinary people are saying no. An Israeli cruise ship was turned away at a small Greek island. The residents wouldn't let them come ashore. And what this tells us is that Israel now is completely isolated in the world, thanks to the actions of Netanyahu and thanks to the actions of Donald Trump, who's been supporting the complete ethnic cleansing of the people of Palestine. We have very brave voices. Haaretz, the Israeli publication, has spoken again and again about the ethnic cleansing and the war crimes. Gideon Levy, I was just reading in Haaretz, he actually invoked Adolf Eichmann as he talked about the situation in Gaza. That shows you how far Israel has fallen in terms of its moral credibility. But I want to end on the voices of ordinary people. You know, I got a call one day from Ted Schmidt, my favorite high school teacher. He's in his 80s. Ted has always been a leader in the vision for justice in the Toronto area. He called me and he said, I'm just going to go stand out on a street at rush hour with a sign that says, "Don't normalize genocide." And people began to come out and stand with Ted. My mother, who's never done anything political, she phoned me one day and she said, I just can't, as a grandmother, as a great-grandmother, watch babies being born blind because their mothers are so malnourished they can't feed them. So my mother said, I'm going to go out with a sign, Grandmothers Against Genocide. That was a Wednesday morning at Bay and Bloor. And since then, the movement of Grandmothers Against Genocide has blossomed. There are multiple vigils all across the city of Toronto. There's Grandmothers Against Genocide in Guelph and in Ottawa. We see groups in Goderich, down in London area. These are all really powerful movements. Just this past week in my region in Northern Ontario, a little town of Iroquois Falls stood up against the genocide. So what does that mean in terms of the big picture? Well, maybe not a lot, but maybe it is very significant. Because in this age of gangsters, in this age of monsters, it falls to ordinary people to speak up if their leaders won't speak up. And we see resistance happening because ordinary people are not being bamboozled by the empty rhetoric of our leaders in the West. They know a genocide when they see one. I'm going to end with a thing I wrote for one of the events. It's not much, but I thought I'd share it with you. It's called Even If. Even if the world pretends it isn't happening, even if the politicians are silent, even if the doctors are being killed, it doesn't mean you can't do something. Even if there's no group for you to join, even if you feel helpless, even if you think that people will think you are crazy, it doesn't mean that you can't do something. You can do something, and together we can do everything. I need you to contact your elected officials and demand they take action. I encourage you to join any of the vigils. These are peaceful protests, people just standing there in silence, but in solidarity. I encourage you to do whatever you can, however you see it, because a genocide is happening, and they will ask us one day, what did you do when the genocide happened? I know I want to be one who said, I spoke up and I did my best to stop it. I'm Charlie Angus.